Welcome. We'll go ahead and get started here. Our speaker is going to be Nguyen. Just some reminders. This Thursday is Victory Tap. We're just to meet up, drink beer, buy the food you want. Love to see you all there. It worked out the last time we were there quite nice.
We were upstairs.
Yes.
You don't see the ground floor.
First Thursday, let's see, we've changed the December meeting, right, Clay?
It's the first Thursday.
It's first Thursday, but it's 6 o'clock here. 6 o'clock here.
6 o'clock.
So that'll be the Christmas party, and we'll announce photographer of the year for those who haven't looked. Let's see, third Thursday is no meeting for December. That's the 21st. And then our first competition meeting will be the 4th of June, January. Well, excited for the day. I'm sorry. Just like I was just going to say, look at the website. Friday, the 1st of December, Sony's Tony Krupp will be doing a free macro class at Precision from, I think, 4:30 to 6 on Fridays. We need input for competition themes. There's a poll out that has place for that. Clay, am I missing anything there on officers in the poll?
Ed has emailed Emmy's ballot. And
Some of the things I have thought about and would like to see us consider doing. One is for competition teams. I want to do an artificial light competition team. And that can be any source with the sun for your photos. Bedside lamp, your strobe, studio strobe, flashlight, and that. Do monochrome. That's not black and white. That's any single color. From white through that color to black. The other concept is to do some hands-on shooting as part of the club meeting instead of a presentation. Maybe I can bring some of my macro setups and we can shoot macro as a group. I'll bring constant light and strobes so we can play with those. Again, the 1st of December, it's up on their website calendar. And Tony was a bug shooter. He shoots bugs. He has meeting where he does macro QC or something like that. Is it macro QC for Tony? So he posts a lot of things. And I signed the club up for a show in October of 21, October 21st to 24 for the show. There's room for 70+ prints. I would like to see some groupings that tend to hang together. Individuals or people that have the same sort of images as one of 4 areas in the show. Mr. Patrick, are you ready, sir?
Sure. So we can make up stuff. Absolutely.
So,
Fake it till you make it?
oh yeah, Van has just given me permission to say whatever I want. So, Van is the senior pro imaging with the Sony Imaging, and he is actually, from what our discussions I think has been, he's actually the equipment guy. So when the pros go out and they say, well, we got Sony pros, Van is the one making sure that they've got all the equipment ready. Okay. Now you've shot also in the past, so we're going to get to hear a little bit about that and a little bit about how Sony's equipment can help in that sense. And I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to you, Van.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks y'all for having me. I'm glad to be able to do a presentation here in my hometown. I was born and raised here in Austin and went to school at Texas State. Back then it was called Southwest Texas. I've been with Sony for 22 years. And I know I still look young, it's those Asian genes. I've got a 14-year-old daughter, 12-year-old son. And we're really happy to be back in Austin. We've moved around quite a bit. I started with Sony back in 2001 at the Sound Marcus outlets when they had a Sony outlet store there. And worked my way up the retail side. And eventually, I graduated from Texas State, or Southwest Texas, and then they changed their name to Texas State. And Sony was like, hey, we're gonna open some stores in Las Vegas. Do you want to? I said, yeah, I'd love to go to Vegas. I've never been before, right? And she was like, well, no. Like, we want you to go to Las Vegas and open the store and help manage and run the store. Oh, well, yeah, sure. So I ended up going to Las Vegas for a few years, and I turned around and said, this is not what I went to school for. I went to school for mass comm, journalism, and photography. And I said, well, Sony's a big company. They've got to have something. So I looked around on the internal website to see if there were any job openings. And my wife's from Denver, and so there was a job opening to be a retail sales rep in Denver. And so back then we still had Circuit City, we had Ultimate Electronics, Sears. I think Montgomery Wards were done at that point. But I would go into those stores and train them on camcorders, and at that point we had acquired Konica Minolta's photography division, right? So we say we acquired it, we didn't purchase it. It was an acquisition where we merged. And I didn't get to go to Thailand and Malaysia where they have the factories, but all the photos that I saw, they just basically took a vinyl banner that said Sony, stuck it over the Minolta logo, and people had Minolta badges with the Sony sticker over the logo. And they just kept doing their jobs, and they kept making the Dynax 100, and they just put a Sony on top, the Sony A100. And that was the birth of the Alpha cameras. We made DSLRs for a few generations, and I thought we made some really great DSLRs, still off of the legacy of Minolta, their body screw drive autofocus mechanisms, and kind of their G optics, which were their premium optics. And at some point, the engineers at Sony said, well, we could probably make some improvements, and coming from a video background, they knew like the mechanical process of flipping the mirror up and down really kind of slowed them down. So we switched to a pellicle mirror, right? And started translucent mirror, interchangeable lens cameras. Still kind of the same stuff. But now you can shoot up to 12 frames per second, and you could actually have autofocus with when you're shooting movies. And then they said, "What? We don't need that mirror. We just need the sensor." And so then, fast forward to now, we've got all these great mirrorless camera bodies, and we can talk about all those if you want to later. But this is what I've been using for the past decade now. Some iteration of all these cameras and all the lenses. And the nice thing about Sony, where we're at right now, is there's really a ton of native mirrorless lenses, over 70 mirrorless lenses available to put on the system. But you can also adapt. Sony doesn't make tilt shift lenses. We don't make some of these kind of quirky things that some people like to use, and can make some really creative looking images with. But you can still adapt those, use the manual focus. I've seen folks with 50-year-old Leica lenses, probably now 60-year-old Leica lenses adapted, and they're every bit as sharp at 60 megapixels as they were back in, post-World War era. So there's a lot kind of going for mirrorless in general. you can adapt a lot of other lenses to other camera manufacturers as well, I know, but you know, I can really just kind of speak to this. Without further ado, you know, I want to talk about the landscape photography that I've done recently, or somewhat recently. If you guys are on Instagram, my account is Van the Sony Man, so it's pretty easy to remember. Go on there, you can follow my travels all around. And I find that I'm not really one of the type of people who plan to travel to a place to make a photo, right? I tend to be a person who is traveling, and I'm in a place, and I'm like, ooh, I want to make a photo here. And then you kind of have to figure out. So there's kind of a difference there in terms of, you know, that's how I get paid. so it's hard for me to kind of sometimes do that. If we're, you know, planning a vacation with my wife and the kids and I, and we're like, you know what, we'd love to go to either, you know, the Grand Canyon. We still haven't gone to the Grand Canyon with the kids yet, or, you know, some of these other places. You know, we'll plan ahead to make some photos. But for the most part, in my normal job, I find myself, as Pat said, you know, supporting a lot of professionals at these major sporting events. So I've been to Super Bowls, I've been to Olympics, World Cup. I was just at the World Cup last year. You know, National Championship's going to be in Houston this coming January. I'll be at College National Championships.
You're not headed back to Vegas?
I will probably be in Vegas a couple times this year. Not this weekend for F1, no. So I technically, I'm based here in Austin, but I cover the southeastern zone, out to Florida, up as far as Oklahoma, and then just kind of across east. However, you know, there are times where our team is kind of stretched thin, and we do kind of crisscross across to support different events. If you're into golf, I've been to the Masters. We support the Masters, a lot of PGA events, Sony Open, PGA Championship, U.S. Open tennis, U.S. Open golf. We've been to a lot of those things. We find ourselves a lot of times with a very fortunate opportunity to get credentials to be able to make some images next to the professionals using the gear. And that's part of it is, you know, we need to know, like, what is our gear not doing for them, right? And where is it failing, and what do we need to tell, you know, the design team, hey, you need to fix these things, you know, because people don't use the camera this way, you know, or whatever it is. And so a lot of times that's what I do every day is I talk to folks just like you know, if you're shooting portraits, if you're shooting landscapes, you know, sports, whatever it is, and you're like, you know what, I used to shoot Sony, I dropped it because of XYZ. That's what we really want to find out. What is that XYZ, and can we fix that? You know, is it something that's within, you know, the scope that we can do now, right? So lots of conversations probably after this. My email is my first name dot last name at Sony. I have a slide at the end that'll show that, but you can always hit me up on Instagram as well. Shoot me a message over at Van the Sony Man. Okay. And I guess I should talk about this photo was in Northern California. This was in Big Sur, yeah, or Monterey kind of area. And we had actually taken a group of photo folks over to the coast. And part of my job, it seems really glamorous because, you know, I get to travel on a company dime, but it's, you know, late 1 a.m., 2 a.m. stuff, and then I sleep for a couple hours, and I get up at 4 a.m. to go help the group that's going to go shoot the sunrise, you know, and so on and so forth. But they do take care of us. They do try to give us some work-life balance. But yeah, that was a great time. Okay, the keys to great landscapes. Location, you got to have a great location for great landscapes, right? Of course, your composition, location. You see where I'm going with this, right? Gear, and of course, location. Landscape is all about the location. And not just any location, right? Because if I want to go to take a picture of Mount Fuji, the best photo of Mount Fuji is not from Mount Fuji, right? So you got to do a little bit of research. A lot of times, Google Maps, you know, you can pull it up on your phone as you're getting to, like, you know, Japan's a really far ways away. You can start kind of planning some of that stuff ahead of time. What I like to use is Google Earth, and I think that's on another slide, but TripAdvisor, Pinterest, Instagram, you know, ChatGPT now even. You can use AI to say, okay, well, I'm traveling from Austin to, let's say, Raleigh. What are some really cool spots, you know, I should visit? And you know, you just have a little conversation with the AI, and it can create a little travel itinerary for you. Have you guys tried any of that before? How many of y'all have played with ChatGPT or any of the AI stuff? A little bit, yeah. People are using it in all different types of ways, and some of this is kind of cool. You know, you can always take it or leave it. You're not going to hurt ChatGPT's feelings if you don't take its advice. But yeah, so, and then of course, you know, you got to consider as well, are you using the free version, which is only up to date to up to a certain amount, or did you pay for the more current, you know, data accessibility? Also, accessibility, like how, you know, if I want to get to take a picture of a place, is it private property? Is it, you know, am I going to be able to go in just any time? Do I have to get a permit? You know, what are kind of the criteria? Those are a lot of the things that you kind of have to think about ahead of time. Fortunately, if you have some people who are really good with logistics, they can kind of help you out with that as well. We have, you know, corporate planners that do a lot of that stuff for us. But, you know, making some phone calls, you know, reaching out to folks in the group that have done similar things. A lot of times you can kind of find out what's needed or what's necessary. So I was in Hawaii and on Oahu in January, and I said, man, I would love to make a photo of Diamond Head. But again, usually you're standing down here somewhere behind some trees or behind some houses, and it's really difficult to make a good-looking photo of Diamond Head unless you're in a helicopter, you know, or a high-rise. And so what I did was, you know, I went onto Google Earth, and I said, okay, I'm a Marriott guy, and I'm a Marriott Platinum. So I said, here's a Marriott right on the edge of this park, which is across from, you know, Diamond Head. So I looked it up and saw, okay, we were actually staying on the windward side of the island, which is way far east for the Sony Open. So after that, I said, okay, I'm going to leave that hotel. I'm going to move into this other hotel because there's a picture I really want to make. And so I, you know, booked my room. I said, you know, if I can, I'd like to get a high level. And if I know you have a lot of windows on that side, I'd like to get a view of Diamond Head. So sometimes you just got to ask for what you want, right? And if you're kind and nice, I feel like, you know, that pays back. I do believe in karma. So like, you know, folks who are there at the front desk are usually, you know, very helpful. And they'll say, okay, yeah, let me see if there's something available. And if there's not, then, you know, that's okay. You know, make friends at the bar, make friends at the pool. Are you on that side of the building? I'm just wondering if I could just use your balcony for like 5 minutes. You know, and that's another great thing about traveling as well. Is while I was on Oahu, you know, I was searching for some great spots and stuff, and I saw some local photographers on the beach doing some wedding portraits. And it's like, okay, this is pretty common probably, but I just kind of like, you know, lingered by, and I was like, oh, they're using Sony cameras. Let me, you know, here's my in. Here's my in, right? So I started talking to, hey, I'm the Sony rep, not for this area, I wish I was, but, you know, I'm here for the Sony Open. You know, could you give me some suggestions of places you like to go and photograph? Sometimes it works out, sometimes not. It depends on the person that you kind of talk to and how well you kind of, you know, kind of jive with them. Because, you know, if you guys are familiar with Hawaii, there's a lot of protective kind of, you know, areas. They don't want, you know, tourists to really just kind of trample into, and especially with Instagram and how popular some, like, you know, areas are. There are sacred places that they're just like, no, you know, don't talk to me, you know. But I wasn't looking for any of those things. I was just like, oh, hey, I'm looking for some shave ice, you know, or I think I said shaved ice, and he was like, shave ice? Because they don't use the D. It's shave ice. Ah, yes. Yeah, so now, next time you guys go to Hawaii, ask for shave ice. So good shave ice, and then I need to get an Aloha shirt, right? Gotta get an Aloha shirt while I'm in Hawaii. And he ended up telling, you'll never guess. He said, oh, you should go to Costco. Costco has great Aloha shirts. I was like, okay. But it was actually a great tip because I went to Costco and there was all sorts of like local stuff that you can't get at our Costco's. But I was kind of like, really, Costco? But you never know. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I go to Liberty House.
Liberty House?
That's just their big department store out in Milwaukee.
Yeah. We found there was a mall that had some nice Aloha shirts there, and I got myself a really nice one that I love. So, but yeah, so you know, scope it out, try to figure out what angles you want, because you know, I saw this and I knew, like, walking around, I was like, no, I'm not gonna get Diamond Head in my photo. It's just, there's a tree here, there's a building here, and then by the time I get out of the trees, out of the buildings, it's too close, right? And so I knew I had to get up and I had to get out. And so what did I do? I went to Google Earth, and this is just in the browser, right? And you can get this kind of 3D view, and you can kind of like plane up and down as if you're flying in a helicopter. And I said, okay, yeah, this is a much better angle. I need to be here on one of these rooftops. That's what I thought. I was like, I probably get access on one of the balconies, probably not the rooftop. And that's what ended up happening. But yeah, this is a great tool as well to kind of help you plan, you know, kind of where you think you need to be, right? Elevation-wise, and kind of to get what picture you want. So just quick Google search in there. Google Earth has gotten really, really good. So another tool that I like to use is an app that's available on iPads, iPhones, and Android devices as well, called PhotoPills. Does anybody use PhotoPills? Yeah, man, wow, you guys, this was gonna be like, wow. But yeah, PhotoPills is awesome. You guys know you can drop a pin where you're planning to shoot from, and you can see when the sunrise is gonna be, when the sunset's gonna be, when the moonrise is gonna be, when is the moon gonna set, where's the galaxy, where's the core, you know, all that stuff. And that's where I get a lot of my astro stuff, you know, kind of planned out. This location was not necessarily something that I picked out myself. This is from Pagosa Springs, Colorado, where my in-laws lived. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm out here. We're gonna go in August, or this was like late July. And I said, you know, where's the galaxy gonna be? And it was just happened to be like across the ridge from them. And so I climbed a little ladder on the back of their RV, set up my tripod up there. And you know, the cool thing about these cameras, and I'm sure that some other cameras can do it too, is there's a feature called bright monitoring. And I just program it to like one of the custom buttons. And when I tap it, it basically just brightens up the image. It opens up the shutter, opens up the aperture, and it just kind of lets the light kind of gather until I can see, you know, the scene. Because otherwise my settings are pretty dark, and it's, you know, I'm gonna shoot with, you know, my intervalometer for a couple minutes, and you know, the camera's not going to give you a preview of that, right? So when you do bright monitoring, it'll brighten up the image just enough so that you can kind of frame it up, right? Compose your image. It's kind of weird because when you move the camera, it's very smeary. It's like, but it's just for, you know, just for preview. And then you click the button again, it goes back to kind of giving you kind of the exposure preview. And then you can just start the exposure. Start the exposure. So I don't remember the exact settings of this shot. This was probably shot with the Alpha 7R Mark III, which was a 42 megapixel full frame camera. Usually I have my 16 to 35 on me, so probably 16 to 35 on that one. Wide open, probably about 1600 ISO. It was a little noisy, but the stars kind of hide it all. And then, yeah, probably 20 to 30 second exposure. So, yeah. But diagonal lines, of course, the regular rules of composition kind of still play. Even though you can't see this when you're looking through the viewfinder, you're like, okay, I hope everything's kind of lined up. One of the nice things I like about these high-resolution cameras these days is that you can shoot a little bit wider than you normally would, and you know, you got a lot of data that you can crop and straighten and kind of make the composition out of that wider shot, which is really nice. Especially when you get up to like the A1, which is a 50 megapixel, or you know, some of these other A7R5, 60 megapixels. This was so that was Pagosa Springs, Colorado. This is Sun Valley, Idaho. And Idaho has some really amazing dark skies. If y'all haven't been, it's this is from a ski resort that during the summertime it's just kind of quiet. You know, families do come and they ride bikes on the trails and kind of hike and stuff, but it's quiet, and I kind of like that. You know, a lot of times we're just kind of like in a lot of urban settings where it's just really kind of constant stimulation going on all around, so it's nice to kind of get away, be able to shoot kind of just quiet. And of course, we were doing a class right now during this session here, so I kind of snuck away from the class, set up my tripod, you know, had my little remote, kind of click it, and then kind of go back to helping other people set up their shots. But the lights that you see on the mountains down there, that's actually from houses and buildings and stuff down below that are, you know, they're using red lights and stuff. They're trying to cut back on blue light. But yeah, this is, you know, part of the town down below there in the trees and stuff. I was a little surprised that, you know, we didn't get more light bleed, but it's a little bit. It's not too bad. But yeah, again, I use this, I use the rule of thirds just to kind of line everything up, get the mountains kind of in that lower third, the galaxy kind of going up in that vertical left side there. That's how I made that one work. And, you know, again, you know, this is St. Louis, of course, Gateway Arch. And we were passing through St. Louis. We were driving from Austin to Wisconsin to visit my wife's sister, who lives in like the Green Bay area. And we said, you know what, we should stop at some places on the way, because the kids need to get their faces out of their screens. We need to make them walk somewhere. so we parked in the garage down below, and we walked over. They were being pretty grumpy until we rounded the corner, and they were like, whoa, what is that? And we ended up taking, you know, we went, I think you'd go down in the middle. There's an entrance down in the middle. Then you walk to one end, and then you jump on the elevator, and it takes you up. I don't know if it's an elevator. What do you call it? It's like a sideways walk-elevator, I think it is, right? The walk-elevator. It goes diagonal up to the top, and then you get out, and you have the tiny little windows up there to see out. And from a distance, you know, we're like, this looks pretty big, but then you get up close to it, and you're like, wow, this is really big. And again, you know, you kind of like, you know, you park, and you walk to where you can see it, and you're like, okay, how do I make a picture of this? I can't. You know, there's just not enough space to get back. And so, you know, while we're up there, I'm looking down, and I'm like, there are boats on the river down there. What's going on? Like, and so we went down and bought some tickets for the boat. And it just was a little boat tour that went down the river, turned around, came back all the way down. And so I said, you know, I could maybe make a picture from the boat, because it's far enough, and there's not a bunch of trees, not a bunch of buildings on that side of the arch. And so, yep, sure enough, tried to find that. And sometimes it just takes a bit of wandering, you know, and just kind of timing. And I had to make sure my kids didn't sit on the rail, because I wanted to get that picture, not with their heads in the shot. So, you know, you kind of have to negotiate a bit with the kids that, yeah, I'll give you some more screen time, no problem. Let Dad sit by the railing. And this, of course, works because it's, you know, symmetrical. It's the symmetry. So yeah. Okay, gear. Lots and lots of gear. Of course, I brought lots and lots of gear. Yeah. But honestly, I don't travel like this normally. Normally, don't travel like that. This is actually, these are Alpha 9 Mark III bodies, and I just took it because I was like, wow, that's a lot of bodies and a lot of money right there. $6,000 a pop. So yeah, so less is more, I feel. And so for instance, when I went to the Olympics, Winter Games in Pyeongchang, I didn't bring any of this gear, actually. I ended up bringing the RX10 Mark IV, which is like a bridge camera, right? 1-inch sensor, but it has a 24 to 600 millimeter fixed lens. And I was like, you know what? If I need to make a picture, I'm gonna make it with this, because it can do almost everything, right? And yeah, so we ended up, you know, wandering around the town some, took some photos. We were able to go to the men's curling match, you know, where they slide the stones and try to knock each other's stones out of the things, the glorified shuffleboard, right? And got some great photos. I don't think I put them in here because it's not really landscape. But that camera, I did take some great photos with it around the town, and you know, I've made some other ones. I think that I do have a couple photos, maybe one more photo in here of it. But okay, photo gear. you know, you can make photos with those, the bridge cameras, point and shoot cameras, your smartphone. That photo of Diamond Head was actually with my smartphone because I wanted the panoramic like that, and I didn't want to stitch a bunch of pictures together. Plus we were kind of running out of time. I was like, you know what, I packed all my gear, I need to ship it out before we leave, and so did that. Yep, question?
When you said bridge camera,
A bridge camera, yeah, so, you know, it used to be, we had, you know, point and shoots were kind of the entry-level camera, and then the DSLRs and were the professional cameras, right? And a bridge camera was kind of something that kind of came in between.
prosumer.
Better than a point and shoot, but not quite to the level of a interchangeable lens camera.
Okay, I've heard like prosumer or something.
Yeah, I mean, people have different names for them, I think, but, you know, I think the most common name is kind of like, yeah, prosumer or maybe bridge camera. You know, by all means, anything that a pro uses can be considered a pro camera, you know. I talk to a lot of photojournalists who, you know, video journalists who are like, you know, I shoot video with my iPhone, and I submit it, and then we broadcast it, and it's broadcast quality. Doesn't mean what it used to mean, you know. So much these days is good enough that you can air it on TV, you know, or you know, we've had movies, full-length movies shot on these cameras, on these mirrorless cameras like this. You know, it's difficult to do. You know, no qualms about that. It can be difficult to do, but you can do it, you know, depending on the style. But yeah, primes versus zooms. Who prefers primes? Okay, we get like who prefers zooms? Everybody else, pretty much? You kind of like indifferent? Depends on the situation? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, I think. Was that?
It always depends.
It always depends, yes. It always depends. I know some people have preferences. Some people prefer to shoot with the primes primarily because you can open them up wider, right? There are simpler constructions, so it's easier to make a prime lens with a larger aperture, right? And it be a little more cost effective that way with a large aperture, right? I'll tell you what, it's easier to repair those as well. So, you know, if something happens, you drop it or something, a lot of folks reach out to me, oh, man, I dropped my lens, or I got it knocked down on the sidelines, like I need to send stuff in for repair, you know, how much is it gonna cost? And I can't give you a quote. I don't know what it looks like. I don't have a workbench at my house that I can put it on and tell you exactly what needs to be done. And so we send it off to service. We have a couple of service facilities, one in LA, one in New York. And they typically will take an inspection of what needs to be replaced, and then calculate the parts and the labor and all that stuff. But it's expensive. It's very expensive. And so that's where, you know, I think a lot of camera manufacturers, Canon, Nikon, Sony as well, we have professional services, right? And that's my group. I help people to kind of get connected with professional services that Sony offers. But there's also, you know, discounts for repairs, expedited repairs, priority repairs, if you're working professional and things like that, right? So we know that these are the tools that you're using for your job, your livelihood sometimes, so, you know, you got to get that back so you can get on with your work. And that's why we do that. Zooms are great, you know, zooms, especially when you're kind of confined to certain locations that you just can't, you know, move a whole lot. You know, if you find yourself hiking up and you get into position to take a picture of El Capitan off of the trail, but you're like, oh man, I'd like to zoom with my feet, but if I do, I'm gonna fall down really, really far, really, really fast. You know, zoom's really handy in that regard. Or having a lot of resolution in your camera to be able to crop in, and that's what a lot of folks are doing these days as well, because, you know, how many of y'all print your photos still? Quite a few. That's great. I wish people printed more photos, right? I will just like dump a bunch of pictures from like family vacations and stuff into Shutterfly even, just to get like 100 of them, so I can throw them in a box, and like when the time is right, we just start like, my kids love just thumbing through old photographs, you know, and it's something that I fear, you know, the younger generation just, everything goes on online, you know, Instagram, Facebook. My sister, not even the younger generation, my sister, who's older than me, even, she's like, I use Facebook as my photo album. I just post everything. And I'm I'm like, well, it's probably not the safest thing to do. But then it's, you know, it's also like, well, what happens when, you know, that account gets stolen and then shut down or whatever, and you didn't have a chance to archive that all. You know, she's like, I don't know, it's on my phones. Like, keep all your old phones? I don't think so. You archive those? I don't think so. And so, you know, it's one of those things. But yeah, you know, I encourage people try to keep printing. You know, it's one of those things that's my kids love it, especially when we go to my mom's house and they find old pictures of us. You know, and so yeah. Anyway, so yeah, so primes have their place, zooms have their place as well. But you know, the zooms, of course, certain manufacturers have different focal length ranges, right? Sony kind of prescribes to kind of the standard. We have a 12 to 24, which is a really great kind of wide-angle zoom. It has a rectilinear design, so you know the angles of buildings and lines will stay nice and straight. We have two versions, a 2.8 and an f4. When you go to typically like a 16 to 35, a lot of times you get some distortion, right? Especially on the wide end, 16. And that's something that either you just go with it, or you can try to do some correction in post. And you know, I mean, I know Photoshop and Lightroom's getting really good at, you know, correcting lens distortion and then filling in the missing bits, which is pretty amazing. But you know, consider that whenever you're selecting your lenses, you know, what the purpose might be and what the end result might be as well. Because I think this image that I shot on the right here, this is in Socorro at the VLA, the Very Large Array. And that was with a 16 to 35, but I didn't like the distortion at the wide end, and so I ended up having to back up a whole lot and then just zoom in to get to like 24 or 30 to make this photo. And I wish I, you know, could take credit for planning this. This was during the Festival of the Cranes. It's like the only time of the year the VLA will allow photographers to come in with their cameras and do photos. There's actually, so the Festival of the Cranes will host a photo class, astrophoto class at night, one of the nights of the festival. And so you have to sign up. Spots go real quick because they have a limited amount. You have to leave your cell phone in the bunker building that they have. You have to turn off all the wireless stuff on your cameras. No signals, because these are real satellites that are gathering data constantly. And you know, it's the right time of year. The Milky Way was kind of coming up this way, and so we got all kind of in position and shot that where it's coming out of the satellite. And these satellites moved, I think, like every five minutes or so, they would kind of start to rotate. So sometimes you have to camp out there for a few minutes and let them kind of do their things. But yeah, that was really cool. And this is from Shanghai. So this is Shanghai in downtown. This is the Shanghai Tower here, the Pearl Tower. My sister-in-law and brother-in-law work for the American Shanghai School. And so we went to go visit them one summer, and we said, we'd like to see downtown, you know, and you know, I've seen this tower. I know it's pretty popular. I'd like to make a photograph of it. And so we jumped on the subway, which, if you've been to the New York subway, you guys been to the New York subway? Super confusing. This is like 10 times worse. 10 times worse. I mean, the city is massive, massive, massive. I think there's like, what is it now? 24 million people in like the greater area. It's crazy. And so the subway sprawls forever. Luckily, they knew where they were going, because a lot of things were in Chinese, and I do not read Chinese. But yeah, so they got us down there, and there's this very large viewing area on this side of the river, on the west side, and it's just packed full of people. And we were like, oh, this is going to be crazy. And I said, well, we got to be patient. The sun was just starting to set, and I was like, you know what? I'm not going to get like a sunset picture here. I'm just going to wait for it to be dark, you know, and just do it nighttime. So we finally kind of like got up to the railing. There's like a big concrete railing there, and I didn't have a tripod, so just set the camera down on the concrete, you know, kind of holding on to the strap around my neck a little bit so I didn't fall in the water. and then just kind of tried to do as short of an exposure as I could, right? And a few short exposures so that I could kind of composite them, later on. And sometimes you gotta do that. If you had, there have been times where, I brought the tripod, but I didn't bring any tripod plates. It's like, oops. Okay, well, gaff tape. Will gaff tape hold it? For a point and shoot, maybe. For a phone, maybe. For my expensive equipment, no. I'm not putting my expensive camera on there. So, I've popped into a 7-Eleven and bought a bag of beans or a bag of rice and used that on a rock and just kind of like a little beanbag chair for the camera. And that's worked, Just kind of have to be resourceful. Sometimes, you stick a camera there, or I've seen folks take their roller bag, and pull the handle up and strap the camera to it. It's like, okay, that's different. But yeah, so those are fun things to see as well. But yeah, so this was a cool experience. My wife is Caucasian and her sister is Caucasian. Of course, I look Asian, and we're walking down the street here, and vendors are talking to me, and I'm like, I don't speak Chinese. I'm sorry. And then my sister-in-law, who's been living there for like 8 years now, she steps in, she starts talking, like, no, we don't need anything. And they're like, what? What's going on? It was really neat to psych them out like that. It was pretty funny. But yeah, I'm not too partial to any particular setup. It's just kind of like, it depends on how light I want to be, how much gear I want to schlep around. I've taken, stuff with my phone. Especially in landscapes, a lot of times you're trying to get just more depth of field, right? So you're stopping down anyway. The smaller the sensor, the more depth of field you're going to get too, just from the geometry of, kind of how the lenses and all that work. So, here on the left side, that's in Snowbird, Utah. I use that with the Alpha 7C, which is the compact. It's a silver version of this camera. So really small, nice travel camera if you're looking to just have something light to go around with. This one's the version 2, which is 33 megapixels. And then we do make a 60 megapixel version, which is the 7CR. And this is the little grip accessory if you need somewhere for your pinky to kind of live. But yeah, so, mirrorless, the promise of mirrorless used to be like, oh yeah, it's going to be so small and light. And then we came out with these big old lenses and these extra grips and all this other stuff to kind of put around it, and it became big again. And it was like, okay, well, we're pretty close to that DSLR size again. So we came out with those pretty recently to kind of continue to just kind of be like, well, we can still do these for the folks who need it. And keep some big cameras around for those folks who want kind of a bigger grip, who have a bigger hand, or, are shooting long glass.
How about smaller action cams and stuff like that?
Yeah, so POV cams, we used to do some POV cams, and we did some really great ones, and I still see them kind of running around. I'm like, man, I don't know where you get the batteries for those anymore, but Sony made some action cams with optical stabilization built in that really, kind of pushed GoPro, and GoPro, of course, was king of POV cameras for a long time. But we kind of went away from it because I think the market really wasn't there for a whole lot. I think at some point, right around the time that we pulled out of that market, like everybody that wanted a POV cam kind of already had it, and it wasn't really growing as much anymore, and it still has its place. I still see people using them for a lot of like behind the scenes stuff, or just kind of for vlogging and that type of thing. So yeah, those are nice cameras though. For the waterfall shot over here, I used the 7R Mark III. This is in Olympia National Park. This was, sometimes you need some filtration, right? So this was with a 10-stop ND, because this is I was using 135 f1.8. I don't think I had it wide open either. But we're trying to get some slow shutter so that we can get that nice kind of feathery look to the water. I did a little bit of a slow shutter drag on the left side, but this was just, I was walking, this was one of those late nights we did some light painting, and then I was walking back to my car, and I said, man, this is a great shot. The moon's just lighting up this mountain, and I see this little stream coming through, and I said, you know what, I'm gonna crawl down this side of this hill a little bit, set up my tripod, just to make this photo. And turned out really nice. I liked it. You get the stars, a little bit of the clouds were moving, so you get a little bit of kind of wisp up there. But yeah, so sometimes, you know, you need some filtration. This was middle of the day, so it was really bright. This was middle of the night, so I didn't need it. So yeah, it looked like daytime almost. But yeah. And this was the end of the day, right? So this was in, oh gosh, is this Malta? This was, yes, I believe this was Malta. My wife and I took a cruise in Europe, and I said, you know what? I want to travel light. And so I didn't bring all my stuff. And this is the camera I was talking about in the lower right corner here. This is this RX10 Mark IV. It's a few years old now, but it's still a really fantastic camera. It's got a Zeiss lens on it, and it's got that 24 to 600 millimeter zoom. You don't have to buy extra lenses for it. That's the one lens you need. That's it. It shoots up to 24 frames per second. You know, you can shoot sports with it. It's kind of slow to recover after it shoots that, you know, so professionals don't really want to use it. But a great travel camera as well if you're looking for something compact, and kind of does a lot of stuff. Has a hot shoe if you need to pop a flash on there. Shoots 4K video and it has an analog mic jack. There's a lot of these cameras that are still around. You know, Nikon makes some great ones too. I don't know if Canon still makes those, but yeah, I'm sure you can find some. But yeah, I really loved having that camera just to kind of keep it. And one of the nice things about a lot of cameras these days, and I think real soon coming up, is that you're going to be able to charge all of these cameras with a USB cable, just like you do with your phone or like with your laptop. Like my laptop just has that. So I just carry my laptop charger around. I can plug it into any of my cameras and charge a battery, you know, with that. And it's like, man, that's great. It's so great. One less brick, you know, to kind of travel with, which is really great. So yeah. And that's the end of that. Questions? Yes?
You obviously have a plethora of equipment and gear that you can carry around and play with all you want to.
Yes.
But let's be theoretical for a minute. You're stuck in Washington, D.C., and you found out you have to drive from here to Los Angeles, and you can take one camera and
Okay. So the situation posed is I have a selection of a lot of equipment that I could pick from, but if I had to drive from DC to LA with only one camera, what would it be? I think it would be that RX10 Mark IV. I think it would be that RX10 Mark IV.
Why don't you have a minivan with a big?
He didn't say. He didn't say. He said. So one camera. I think that's the one. You know, because you know, again, I mean, I wouldn't be planning to shoot anything like I'm not stopping on the side of the road to shoot a Cowboys game, you know, a Cowboys football game. You know, so I don't need, you know, all of the crazy fast prime lenses or, you know, things like that. I don't need a 400-2.8. You know, I'm not shooting to the wire, so I don't need FTP. I don't need, you know, some of these other things. If I just need to make a good photo, it could be I mean, a lot of phones do a really great job. You just got to know how to use it, right? Like, and how to get the most out of it. Some phones have, you know, one of the things that I get a lot from customers is like, man, my phone takes, you know, can take some great images. Why do I need to buy a dedicated camera? It's more work for me. And it's like, yeah, it's going to be more work for you. Your phone does a lot of these things called computational photography, right? Where it's taking a series of images and then compositing it together, and then it's presenting it to you as if it's one picture. You know, HDR images and things like that. You've seen the Google Pixel commercials where it's like swapping faces now, right? And it's like, oh, the perfect picture. It's like everybody's looking different directions, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, everybody's smiling and looking forward, right? Computational photography is a big deal. It's using a lot of AI, a lot of the new kind of technology that's happening now. So it's hard to say, like, you know, I'd like to have that stuff, you know, but then I'm also kind of like, I came from a journalism background, and you don't do that type of stuff. You know, that's against the code of ethics. You kind of have to, you got to make it right in camera, and it is what it is, you know, and I mean, you know, if you can add some light, you know, and that type of thing, and understand the mechanics of how things go and how the light's coming in, you know, do what you can to make a good photo, but, you know, the reality is, you know, there's a lot of AI stuff happening, a lot of digital stuff happening that is impacting the photography world, right? So if I'm making just pictures for myself, that's fine, right? But if I'm having to submit them for somebody else, you know, I think about that journalistic integrity that you know, I want to maintain. Question? Yes?
Nikon has been the first to market a global shutter.
Okay.
And do you know of Sony, or can you comment on what Sony's plans are for a global shutter?
Backwards.
A global shutter,
So-
Nikon.
Sony, the A93.
Huh?
The A93 has global shutter.
The Sony
I
A9.
thought it was Nikon.
No. Nikon supposedly has a super fast shutter coming out, and speculation is it'll be a global shutter, but Sony beat Nikon to the punch.
Yeah.
You can explain what.
So global shutter, yes, okay, I was waiting for this question. I spent all last week explaining it to lots of people in New York. But yeah, so global shutter is the new kind of buzz right now, because obviously Sony has announced in the Alpha 9 Mark III, which will be available hopefully next spring, maybe a little bit earlier, February to March timeframe. It's going to sport a stacked CMOS sensor with global shutter feature. And what a global shutter is basically an image sensor that's able to read all of the pixels simultaneously. All of the pixels simultaneously. Versus, right now, what every camera sensor right now does is a sequential readout, right? So imagine this TV screen is an image sensor. The camera's gonna read line by line, from left to right, one line at a time, till it gets to the bottom. That's a sequential readout. The way that I explain it is, imagine if you're reading a book, right? You open the page, and you start to read left to right, top to bottom, until you read the whole page. What if you could turn the page, look at the page, and then read all of it at once, and then just keep moving on? Like, that's the difference in sequential readout versus simultaneous readout. Yes?
More commonly known as film.
Film, yes. But even with film, so
I understand.
yeah, so film, exactly, yes. But the problem was with, you know, with the shutter type that we have, it would start, the curtain shutter would start and stop the exposure, of course, in sequence, right? Unless you had a leaf shutter. So it's basically a leaf shutter, right? But electronic. And the way Sony's doing it, you know, we use a stacked CMOS sensor where we basically have layers behind the photosensitive side of the imager. This is where the wiring happens for the data to transmit. This is also where there's a buffer to hold the data because it's coming off so much faster, right? So when light hits the sensor, it goes through, and then it gets saved into the buffer behind the DRAM chip, if you will, behind the image sensor until the processor can get to it, save it as digital file onto the SD card or whatever media you're using.
So the advantage of that is burst rate or buffering? Or
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked. What is the advantage of that? So there's a couple things. You know, obviously, if you're reading the whole sensor all at once, there's no delay in what happens at the top of the frame versus the bottom of the frame. So imagine if I'm swinging a baseball bat or swinging a golf club, you know, or you're taking a picture of an airplane, the propellers moving. When you start the exposure, the props of the plane will be in one position. When you finish the exposure, the props will be in a different position, and you get some distortion. Not motion, but it's shutter distortion, right? So up to this point, we've done a lot of things like with the Alpha 9 and the Alpha 1 to do anti-distortion, but it's not zero distortion, right? So now with a global shutter, you're able to get zero distortion, which is great for sports. But if I don't shoot sports, not really going to be worth it for me, right? Well, there's some other applications as well. With a global shutter, again, you can now flash sync at any shutter speed. At any shutter speed. No more HSS, right? Where it's blinking a bunch of times. Yeah, and I've tried it, it does work. We had a setup where it was some pro photos, and I don't think it had any special firmware on the pro photo trigger. It was an Air TTL trigger, which is pretty, I've seen it, it's pretty standard. Dialed it up to 1/80,000th of a second, because it goes up to 80 thousandths of a second now, which is crazy. And we shot some photos with the strobe, and it synced, and I was like, okay, wow, that works. I don't like it. I didn't like the outcome. It was really dark. So the scene that we had set up was a kind of a futuristic cyberpunk Tokyo kind of thing. We had a rain machine, these models in these weird plastic suits, you know, and lots of neon. It looked really cool. I was like, man, the set designers did an awesome job. And the gaffers and everybody, I was like, wow, that's cool. And then you dial it up to 80,000 of a second and you put a flash on it, it just like washed out all the color. I was like, well, okay, well doesn't look so great. so, you know, it's for specific setups, not necessarily that setup. But yeah, so it is nice though, because, you know, there are some sports, like I work with the Dallas Mavericks and the Houston Rockets, and they're always trying to sync as fast as they can. And, you know, I think one of the reasons that a lot of NBA photographers use Nikon is because with a lot of the Nikon bodies, you could sync at 1/320th of a second, right, with their arena flash. And Canon didn't do that, Sony didn't do that. You know, we would sync at maybe like 1/200th of a second. Technically, if you used, you know, bless you, if you use Sony flashes, you could sync up to 1/250th of a second. But, you know, with Pocket Wizards and all this other stuff, it really only worked out at 1/200th, right? And then even at 1/200th, with arena strobes, you're getting some ghosting, especially in basketball, you know? And so for a long time, we didn't make a whole lot of inroads with those folks until the A1 came out. Right? And then all of a sudden you could strobe sync at 1/400th. And they were like, okay, this works, not a problem. And so, but then it's just like, okay, well, you can use it on your body, but that's a really expensive camera to set up as a remote up in the rafters and stuff. And so a lot of them still use their Nikons up in the rafters and, you know, behind the backboards and all that stuff. And some of them are switching stuff out, but yeah.
So on that 1/80,000th of a second
Yeah.
sync,
80,000.
a full power strobe
Yes,
is on for longer than an 80,000th of a second, so you wouldn't get full power, would you?
that's correct. So they thought of that.
Okay.
They thought of that. So yeah, there's definitely like kind of like this bell curve, right? If you look at the flash duration and the peak of brightness and then the drop off, right? And there's actually a timing delay that you can kind of set inside the camera. Now, the Pro Photos, I'm not sure if we worked with the Pro Photo folks or what, I'm not sure. It seemed to be working fine, just popping their trigger on there and you know, turning, we didn't turn HSS off, was it? We turned the flash timing priority, I think it was called, flash timing priority on in the camera, and it synced fine. We did try it, we kind of tried to experiment before everybody else kind of gets in there to test the camera. We brought an old single pin Pro Photo trigger, and we said, okay, well, let's see if we can get this to work. And we popped it on and you know, shot a couple pictures. Like, oh, it's kind of dark, right? So we dialed it. There's a little meter inside of the camera that when you turn that feature on, you can add microseconds, yeah, 20 at a time, and you just kind of start testing it out. Let's go to 300. See if we can add 300 microseconds. Is it brighter? Yes, it's brighter. Okay. How about 400? How about 450? And you can kind of figure out where that, you know, peak is. It may take longer or, you know, shorter depending on you know, the strobe setup that you're using. But you can dial it in with a third-party strobe system that is not necessarily made for Sony. Yeah, but it takes some experimentation.
So does that new camera have a physical shutter still?
Does it have a physical shutter? No, it does not. It does not have a physical shutter anymore. It does have a curtain that comes down to protect the sensor when you're swapping lenses that you can enable. but it does not have a physical shutter anymore.
What's the ISO range?
The ISO range in this one, it starts at 250 native, ISO 250 native, and it goes up to 25,600. Expanded, it'll go down to 100, up to 50,000 ISO. Yeah. Question back there?
Compact Flash A can be a problem.
Is Compact Flash A, so CF Express Type A? Is CF Express Type A going to be a problem? I don't think it's going to be a problem. So far, it does seem like it's fast enough, right?
Is that why it's only like a second or so
On the A93, no. So the buffer on the A93 can hold 200 images. If you're shooting at 120 frames per second, that's like a second and 1.6 seconds at 120 FPS, which I don't recommend because that's a lot of editing. But especially for 1.6 seconds. So what the engineers did is they designed it to where you could dial the continuous shooting speed down. You could shoot at 30 FPS, 20 FPS, 15, 10, or 5. And then there's a custom button on the inside of the grip, a C5 button. You can program any of the customizable buttons, but say you're shooting at 5 frames per second, you can press another button to boost, we call it speed boost, and it can boost up to 120 frames per second. It doesn't have to be 120 frames per second. It can be 30, so you go from 5 to 30. You can do, 60 to 120, or you can do the opposite. You can go from, 30 down to like 5 or something, depending on how you want to set up. And I did talk to some sports photographers while we were, there with the introduction of the Alpha 9, and how would you use this feature? I'm trying to figure out how to tell customers how you would use it. And I was talking with a baseball photographer, and he said, I shoot every at-bat at home, and it'd be nice, I don't need 120 FPS of the dude rounding the bases, but I do want 120 FPS right at that moment of the bat strike. It's like, okay, and yeah, you don't want to reach up and be turning knobs and changing dials and stuff. And so having that ability to kind of just quickly kind of hold another button down while I'm shooting to just quickly have that'd be nice.
Yeah,
it's like, okay.
For wildlife.
And for wildlife, yeah, for birds. I think folks who are shooting birds, you'd be shooting a few birds, and then you don't know when the bird's thinking, oh yeah, that looks like a tasty bug down there. I'm gonna leave. And you can and on that note, a lot of folks were also really interested in the pre-capture as well, right? Pre-capture is the feature where it's buffering, pre-buffering, and then when you press the shutter button all the way down, it saves that buffer and then continues to shoot, at whatever speed you're set to after that. And that's a feature that you can adjust. You can make it pre-buffer as little as 0.005 seconds. I guess that's if you're just kind of a little slow with the draw. You just want that microsecond before, or as much as 1 second, right? So, and it'll start buffering at whatever FPS that you're currently set to. So, if I'm set to 30 frames per second, then I press the shutter button halfway. You can do one of two things. You can have the shutter button halfway press to start activating the buffer, or you can do the back button focus or AF on button to activate the pre-buffer. You just have to toggle it on in the menu beforehand. But yeah, there's a little indicator on the screen that will show you it's buffering, and then when you press it the rest of the way, then it's shooting. Yes?
Okay, this is a very expert group, and the group is saying, no, we don't want to care. We don't care about this, but you brought a lot of cameras. With
Yes.
A lot of lens. So
Yep.
we got a lot of Canon and Nikon photographers. I think James is in.
Sure.
Sony photographer? I'm Sony.
You're Sony also. Hi, Sony.
So what you brought with you,
Yes.
you want to give us quick summary
Yeah.
of each
So
camera?
people are always confused about the Sony lineup, and I can't blame you. I'm sorry, we've done a horrible job. We've done a horrible job of introducing cameras just kind of in out of order.
The numbers change.
The numbers change. You have all these numbers and letters, and it's alphabet soup, right?
Do them in order.
Yeah. So I would say okay. So I did not bring any of the 6000 series, right? So we have Alpha 6000 series, and any 6000 series that you see out there, those are going to be our crop sensor bodies. And it kind of goes up in numerical order. 6100 is kind of where we currently are. 6300, 64, 66, 6700. And as you go up, you gain features, bigger battery. Typically, the resolution is the same across the lineup, though. You're shooting at about 24 megapixels. So I didn't bring those, you know, but we do have those. And they range from, I think the 6100 right now is like $750 for the body. You can buy it as a kit, of course. And it goes up to like $1,500 for the 6700, which uses the same batteries that we have here, the Sony Z batteries, which are much better than the W batteries if you guys use any of those. But yeah, so the 7 series is kind of what we've been known for in terms of full frame cameras, right? So the 7 is what started it all out, and the 7 has kind of a hidden meaning to it. Back in the Minolta days, their 7, even was it the Dynax?
Maxim or Dynax?
Maxim or Dynax 7 was like their primary, like their
Maxim 7000.
7000, yeah,
Dynax
that's right,
7.
Dynax. Yep. And so the 7, we continue to use that as kind of our main line. And so any of the 7 cameras that have a 7 in it, those are going to have a traditional back illuminated CMOS sensor, right? And so good for you know, just general photography. If there's the 7 Mark IV, where am I? Here we go. The 7 Mark IV is kind of the heart of the lineup, right there. And this is enough camera for most photographers out there. Bless you. A couple card slots, 33 megapixels, great for portraits, great for landscapes, great for family, you know, photography, you know, some light sports, you know, that type of stuff. Great camera. If you're wanting to shoot video, you know, it has a lot of video features as well. So a lot of folks who are kind of hybrid journalists or MMJs, as they call them, they'll typically grab one of these because they're tasked a lot of times with shooting video as well as stills. And then from that line, we kind of split into 2 different directions, right? We have the S series here. Looks the same, but on the front it has a 7 with an S next to it, right? And on the back here is where you see which version of that S body it is. And this is the Alpha 7S Mark III. We go down in megapixels here, down to 12, right? And that's for a reason. 12 megapixels, when we shrink down the resolution, we can make the photodiodes much bigger. It's a bigger catcher's mitt to catch all the photons, right? So this one is the king of low light. This will go down to 400,000 ISO, and it looks nice and clean still, usable still. I won't say nice and clean. It's usable. May need a little bit of cleanup. But the reason that we chose 12 megapixels, right? The sensor is still 3:2 aspect ratio, like a 35 millimeter piece of film. But when you shoot movies, you're typically shooting for a 16:9 aspect ratio. So we're not using the top 2 megapixels and the bottom 2 megapixels. We're using exactly the middle 8 megapixels that's needed for 4K video. So when you shoot 4K on this, you get a 1-to-1 pixel readout, right? The best that you can get. And that's why they picked 12 megapixels. So a lot of folks who are shooting video primarily typically go for the S. You know, I say to folks, you know, you can take some great photos with this if you're just going to be posting them to social media. You don't even need 8 megapixels. You know, you need like 2 for your phone screen. You know, 2 for an HD screen. You know, or 8 megapixels for, you know, a 4K screen. So yeah. So then you go from S to the opposite side of the spectrum, which is the R series. You get moved around. Or am I still doing that? Oh, here. The R series is our resolution camera. So it's a 60 megapixel full frame sensor. You know, again, same size sensor, so we got to squish more of those pixels in there, 60 million of them, right? So unfortunately, those little baseball mitts get really small, so the light sensitivity kind of takes a hit. So you end up cranking your ISO up a little bit, in situations you wouldn't have to on some of the other cameras. And unfortunately, that can result in some noise, right? But there's a lot of really great software out there now that can map out that noise really amazingly. If you need that file, it's great, but again, be careful what you wish for, right? Because I've talked to a lot of portrait photographers. I was just supporting a high school seniors portrait conference here in Austin at the Domain 2 weekends ago. And a couple of photographers came over to me and said, I have the 7R4 or I have the 7R5. Can I get into something with a smaller megapixel? I was like, really? Okay, sure. I said, you know, you can turn the resolution down. They're like, not on the RAWs. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess you can shoot small RAW, but whatever. Yeah, so the workflow of moving those files was really killing them. Storage was killing them, you know, like it was just taking too much time to ingest the cards and all that stuff. And they're trying to turn over students, you know, and get their pictures, you know, back to them and stuff. And so a lot of them ended up moving back towards the 7 Mark IV. 33 megapixels is going to be plenty for them, right? But for landscapes, I love having that resolution, you know, especially when I don't bring a long lens with me or something, I can crop it. Or I know I'm not going to be shooting so quickly and you know, make too many files. So yeah, so there's that. A lot of real estate, I think a lot of real estate photographers love it. Again, I'm not real sure why. I guess if you're doing high-end real estate, and you're going to like make a website for this person's house that they're selling, mansion or whatever, or you're going to put architecture photos into a magazine or a book, that's great. But MLS does not want your 60 megapixel files. I'm going to tell you that from the get-go. But you can make some great photos out of it. So, you know, those are the main, you know, 3 branches of the 7 series. So you kind of pick your poison, right? You need more resolution, less resolution, or somewhere in between, right? And all the cameras will do stills, all the cameras will do video. There are some drawbacks. If you have too much resolution, the camera's not going to do real well pulling all of the pixels, you know, from that big sensor. So maybe cropping down on the sensor is going to give you better video quality, you know, versus if you go with a smaller resolution camera, you know, it's got just the right amount of pixels for 4K, but then if you crop down on that sensor, you no longer get 4K, you have HD quality, you know. Yeah. So then folks said, well, those are great. I love having the dual card slots. I love having the bigger grip. But when I'm traveling, I wanted to keep it smaller, right? I'm in a backpack. You know, every ounce counts. And so we came out with the C series, Alpha 7C, and we have 2 of those. We actually have 3 of them, but this is the Alpha 7C Mark II, which essentially has the same sensor as the Alpha 7 Mark IV. It's the 33 megapixel sensor. And it's just in the more compact rangefinder style, right? You got the viewfinder off to the side. The screen still flips out. These both have the same body style, by the way. So screen flips out if you want to do selfies, if you want to do vlogging, you want to put it on a gimbal, just do some video, things like that. 7C, again, that smaller resolution is great for kind of hybrid work. So a lot of folks who are doing some video, throwing this on a drone, that type of thing, they're going to go for this camera. If you need that high resolution, then you're going to go for something like the Alpha 7CR, right? C for compact, R for resolution, right? And so that's the 60 megapixel, not only the sensor, but also the AI focusing chip that we have in the 7R Mark V as well. Okay, so that's the 7 series. And that's where most people tend to kind of live. And then we have a couple other series. We have the 9 series and the Alpha 1 series. Right, and the 9 and the 1 are kind of built from the same kind of recipe. So these cameras use what's called a stacked CMOS sensor. So like I was saying before with the Alpha 9 Mark III, we layered, you know, number one, we rewired how the data is read from the chip and goes to the processor and eventually the card. Because before, in any of the 7 series, you know, with this back illuminated sensor, light hits the surface of the imager, and it gets read on little tiny wires out to the edge of the sensor to a ribbon cable that goes out and around, and then to a processor, and then to your memory card. It's a long path to travel. It takes a lot of time in digital, you know, in digital years, in camera years. So the shortest path is to just go straight through. So light hits the front of the sensor, goes right back a short ways, to where it can kind of be held, and then eventually written to the card, right? And so with that, the Alpha 9 was the first one to come out, and it was 24 megapixels, stacked CMOS sensor, could shoot 20 frames per second with an electronic shutter with no distortion, right? That's the other thing, or I shouldn't say no distortion, with an anti-distortion shutter, right? So a lot of folks started to find out with the 7 series, hey, there's a silent mode, I can switch to silent mode. It's not gonna release the physical shutter, it's just gonna do a scan, right? And that's really cool, it's really quiet, so I can shoot during church services, or during a funeral, or during something where it's a really quiet moment. And then all of a sudden they say, whoa, those pictures don't look good. I'm getting some like mini blind shadows, or things are really like wobbly, like looking really kind of weird. And that's the rolling shutter that you're getting, the sequential readout of a slow sensor, right? Those cameras, the 7 series, they're typically made to shoot with the mechanical shutter. So the 9, though, was able to shoot without the mechanical shutter. And I remember being in Washington, D.C., when we first introduced this to New York Times, AFP, Reuters, Getty, Associated Press, Nat Geo, all these folks, and we handed them some cameras, gave them a little training, and they went off to go shoot it for a while, and they were like, wow, this is different. This is a game changer. Because not only while you're recording with the electronic shutter, now the sensor is always seeing the scene, right? So in these other cameras, and even with these DSLRs, as soon as you press the shutter button, the mirror flips up and blinds you, or the shutter blades close the sensor and blind you, right? Now you don't have that. With the stacked CMOS sensors, you can look through the camera, look through the viewfinder, and while you're shooting, you're seeing everything going on. And so it's much easier to anticipate where the subject is going. If it's a bird, obviously they kind of go all different directions, or sometimes, animals and stuff go kind of wonky. And so you can track the subject a little bit easier, right? And so it's like, well, how do you know when you're taking a picture then? And that's a real problem. That was a real problem early on. We have a little indicator that's around the edge of the frame, so you kind of have to have your peripheral vision kind of notice when there's this blinking box around the frame. And then we inserted an artificial shutter sound to kind of give you an idea if you need that. Because if you're shooting a model and you're just like, oh yeah. She's like, are you taking pictures? I don't know. They're waiting for that audible click of the camera shutter. And so when we added the artificial sound, they were like, okay, now I know. Okay, you got that pose. Okay, yeah. Okay, now this one. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. And you can kind of get a little bit more reaction. But I think the silent thing, we put it in there, and we knew it was a neat feature. We didn't know how cool it was going to be, like how great photographers really liked it. Doug Mills, who's one of the New York Times photographers, he took it to some debates, and he's shooting on the stage side, and I think one of the stage managers was like, are you going to shoot any photos? And he's like, I've been shooting hundreds of photos. This is a silent camera. And the stage manager was like, you could see them kind of like pause for a moment, like, you can do that? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, we should make everybody shoot with a silent camera. And especially in politics, I remember not that long ago, you'd be watching a couple presidents get together to and you couldn't even hear what they're saying. All the shutters were, going off. All the mirrors slap is really what you were hearing a lot of. But, nowadays you'll hear very few of that. But yeah, then we came out with the Alpha 1, which upped the game even more, because then we went to a 50 megapixel sensor, but even faster readout at 30 frames per second. And now Sony doesn't, skimp out. We always, we want to give you full autofocus and full auto exposure control all at the same time while you're shooting at 20 frames per second, 30 frames per second. And so we'll do that if we can, right? Depending on the autofocus motor technology that's in our lenses or somebody else's lenses. Because of course, there's folks out there that are going to use Sigma and Tamron. That's okay. We're not we're not going to be haters about that. But yeah, so the Alpha 1 all of a sudden became the king of the mirrorless cameras. And, you know, folks for a long time were like, well, Sony, you don't have a 300-2.8 mirrorless, you don't have a 2:4 f4, you know, you're missing some focal lengths. You know, we came out with the 400-2.8, which is amazing, and a 600. There's nothing kind of in between, right? Until we just announced the 300-2.8. But a lot of folks in the meantime were taking the Alpha 1, and they would crop in on the sensor to APS-C size, because it's 15 megapixels to start out with. When you do that, all of a sudden you reduce down to 21 megapixels, which is still very usable. And if I have a 7200, that effectively will give me a 1.5 times crop. I'm getting the look of a 300-2.8 at 21 megapixels, but I'm only carrying it at 7200, you know, which is pretty cool. And so you'll still be able to do that with the new lenses, you know, the 300-2.8, pop it on the A1. If I use the crop in, it's going to be effectively 450 mil, 2.8 at 21 megapixels, you know. That's where I think folks are going to kind of second guess the Alpha 9 Mark III. They're going to be like, do I need the Alpha 9 Mark III if I need, you know, kind of those weird kind of focal lengths where it's like I want to use that crop in? Because whenever you crop down on a 24 megapixel sensor, you're left with like 10. It drops significantly, right? And a lot of folks probably don't want that. You're going to buy a $6,000 camera. You don't want to be probably just getting 10 megapixels out of it. So you're going to get the, you know, the full frame lenses, the bigger lenses, to cover the lengths that you need. But yeah, so kind of going back to the 9 Mark III, that is the new one on the block with the global shutter feature. The grip also changed as well. Every time we come up with a new generation of cameras, you got to keep an eye on whether we change, you know, kind of the ergonomics and the grip of it, because that's typically one of the things we'll have is the grip is a little bit more rounded, a little deeper, a little longer, so it kind of, you know, feels a little more comfortable, especially if you have long lenses on there. The buttons are more pronounced, especially the custom buttons up here, and some of the dials and things as well. You know, one of the gripes that I hear about the, you know, some of the current lineup is the articulation of the screen. There's not a whole lot of articulation, right, or not enough. So A1 even, at the time that it came out, this is the screen that we were putting on it, which tilts down about 45 degrees, and then up a little more than 90 degrees, right? Not great if you're shooting verticals of a senior and you're, you know, down on the floor trying to get some water reflection or something creative. You're still having to kind of crane your neck, get down on the floor. And so when we came out with the 7R5, we said, well, here's a screen that we can flip out to the side, flip it around so you can get those low angles, but then you can also still flip it, you know, up and down like that, right? This is my mode because I'm short. Right? Get up above people. Yeah. But this is great too whenever you're shooting and you just want to get, you know, kids and get down to their level and stuff. You know, or you wanted to kind of do the old twin lens reflex experience. But that same screen is now what's going to be on the 9 Mark III, right? People were really happy about that. I was happy about that. But yeah, CF, I think. You were talking about CF Express. Did I answer it?
Yeah.
Mostly? Because we kind of went off on a tangent about the shutter speed.
I thought the buffer speed was, you know, I didn't know the buffer was the limitation. I thought it was getting it.
The buffer is the limitation mainly, yeah. It clears very fast with the CF Express A slots. Even because the A1, it shoots at 30 frames per second, 50 megapixels JPEG plus RAW.
Yeah.
Right? That's a lot of data. And it does have a slightly deeper buffer, but when you hit the bottom of the buffer, it takes a little less than 5 seconds for it to clear every picture off. But you don't have to wait till every picture is cleared off. You can start shooting again. You know, you'll hit the bottom of the buffer and it'll slow down a little bit, but that's the main thing. Yeah. 120 though, you don't need to shoot. Nobody needs to shoot all the time at 120. I don't think. There may be. Patrick.
Yeah, just a general question. It's not, you know, brand specific.
Okay, yeah.
When you have, let's say you've got a 50 meg sensor.
Okay.
And you shot raw, and you bring back, you put it on your hard drive, and you start looking at the size of the files.
Mm-hmm.
They're larger than 50
Okay, sometimes, yes.
So, do you have any idea what's going on there?
I do.
Ah, yeah. What's your answer?
Okay, so for every pixel you draw,
Yeah.
you have to assign data to the computer, right? Okay, so let's start with black and white. That's 0 and 1, and you can represent those with 1 bit of computer data. Now you need the next 2 colors, or to get to colors 3 and 4, that's a 2nd bit. And then the next 4 colors are a 3rd bit. And the more colors you have in your photograph, the more bits you'll use. In the ancient days, to compress photos, what they would do is they would take the color that you use the most in the photograph, like say you take a picture of blue sky, and they would map that shade of blue to 0. And that's how they would make the picture smaller. But if you have a lot of colors in your photo, then some of those bits will take more. So you have 8 million pixels, say, or 50 million pixels. And if you have a bunch of different colors, then you're going to use higher bit registers that will use more memory.
Yeah, yep. So yeah, so the general rule for Sony, I can't speak to other manufacturers, but the general rule for Sony is if you're shooting compressed RAW, which is the default RAW, 1 megapixel equals 1 megabyte. So a 50 megapixel camera will give you roughly a 50 megabyte file, give or take. Because yes, the content is different, so it's going to take up a little bit of different space. Now we do have other RAW types that are inside the camera as well. So you have now uncompressed RAW, which does no compression whatsoever. You're roughly 2 megabytes per megapixel, so that each photo from the A1, each single photo can take up to 100 megabytes, give or take. Yeah, R5 is like 120. Yeah, so, and then by popular demand, people said, those are big, those are really big. Can you make a small RAW, a medium, a large, get something like that? And so we had this, we put in lossless compression, which preserves integrity better, but we have a large, medium, and small lossless compressed RAW. And the large lossless compressed RAW is somewhere in between the compressed and uncompressed RAW, right? The file size. So large, so it's like uncompressed is the biggest, lossless, large, next biggest, compressed RAW, lossless compressed medium, lossless compressed small. And that's how the file sizes go. So yeah, so, and each camera company's RAW is their own recipe, right, of how they, read the data off of the sensor and process that. So that's not always a rule of thumb for, other companies, but, JPEGs, a lot of folks, a lot of the newspapers and agencies, of course, shoot just in JPEG. They don't shoot RAW ever. And it's mainly for workflow, right? And be able to manage all of the files coming in of, from all their photographers around the world. Someday, I don't know when, but someday that may change, that may shift from JPEG. I mean, JPEG's been the standard forever, for a very long time. But HEIF files are high efficiency image file format. HEIF files are becoming very popular. Guess who made them popular? Apple, yes. If you're familiar with the Apple photos, you had to export like the JPEG. So Apple started using them, and I've had folks who used to shoot JPEG and RAW or RAW, and said, you know what, I don't think I need to shoot RAWs anymore. I can just use these HEIF files, because you can shoot a 422 10-bit image that's about the same size as a JPEG, but has much more data and much more kind of dynamic range and color information than a JPEG does. And so we have those in a couple of our bodies, not all of them yet, but some of the newer stuff has the ability to do that. And a lot of software is starting to kind of catch up to where it can, like I think all the Adobe stuff can open those files. Photo Mechanic, if you guys call images in Photo Mechanic, it can recognize the HEIF files. You can't do live ingest, but you can at least go through and do your culling and stuff in that.
Isn't lossless and compressed a contradiction in terms?
I know, yes.
No.
Lossless compression.
So like I was talking about before, so imagine a chessboard and you have 64 squares, right?
Okay.
If they are just black and white,
Okay.
then that's fine. But if you had 32 colors on it, then you would need more memory on it.
Okay.
And if you mapped the color you use the most to 0 and second most 1, you would make the file smaller, but you would still have all the information. So if you can make the file smaller but keep all the information, that's lossless compressed.
Okay.
But when you start losing information, like a JPEG, it'll take the 4 pixels that are next to each other and average them out.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there's different techniques.
Another form of lossless is just look at the adjacent pixels, and if they're the same color, by the time you get to the third adjacent pixel, now I've got to count and how many pixels of this color. So if you had 40 pixels of the same color, you'd still only have 2 representations of it, a count and the digital value for the color.
Okay.
Yeah, similar, you kind of have to rearrange the pixels in the picture, kind of like what your histogram would do on your back of your camera, right? It's like, okay, well, just line these up, and you see kind of like, okay, well, here's how many bright pixels I have versus how many dark pixels I have. And the camera recipe inside is basically saying, okay, well, we can combine some of this information. They're the same. We just got to remember where to put them back, right? And that's what compression is basically. It's just trying to figure out how can I fold this down, how can I pack my clothes in my suitcase and not get wrinkles, so that when I get to my destination, I can just pull my shirt out, put it on, and it looks ready to go out on the club.
All there is just folded more efficiently.
Exactly, yes. And that's where like, yeah, JPEG has been kind of the de facto standard. It's like, okay, well, this is how I learned to fold clothes. My mom taught me how to fold clothes this way, so I'm going to keep folding clothes this way. And then I marry this awesome woman who's like, why are you folding clothes that way? And she's like, fold them this way. And I was like, yeah, that's better. And then it's like, okay, we don't need to do JPEGs anymore. I'm going to do HEIF files. I don't need, compressed RAWs anymore. I'll use these lossless compressed. It's similar kind of like that, right? So yeah. Yes?
Do the Sony buddies have different size RAW files? Like a medium and a small file? Yeah.
So yes, so the 7R5, the 8 Alpha 1, not all of them, yeah. Not all. 9.2 still. So and you'll notice like if you play with some of these, like there's different menu systems in these cameras. And a lot of people are like, oh, why don't you, of course my battery's probably dead. Why don't you, give me a firmware update and put the new menu system in, right? Because it's better. So I go into A1. So the new menu system, quote unquote, new menu system for Sony, the categories are kind of run up and down the side, and then they kind of page in, that way. Versus the old menu system, which had tabs across the top, and you think of like a file cabinet where you see the tabs, and then you go down into that, and you have pages inside of there, and then you page left and right. It's a little harder to see everything this way versus the new menu. And so, people are like, I like this new menu. You also put format in a much easier place to get to, rather than the very end. But unfortunately, it's not just, the menu. It's an operating system, basically, that we have to put on top of a compatible processor. So if the processor hasn't been updated, you may not be able to get this whole new operating system, right? And that's where the problem comes into, is there's things that, we, again, kind of, it's seemingly, we release things kind of in a weird order, and then some features make it to a camera that's a lower tier, than another, but it doesn't, the flagship camera doesn't have that feature, like the screen or something. But it's like, you know what, the hardware was what it was when we came out with it, we can't really do software things sometimes to change those things. We can do software to add, the way, we format video or something. If you want DCI 4K, you want cinematic, wide 4K, you want anamorphic desqueeze, you want some of these other things. Yeah, that's mainly software driven. Yeah, you may need like a special lens or something, but there's some things that we can. And I've been in a lot of those meetings before where we sit down in a room with the whiteboard and the design team, and we start rattling off stuff like, yeah, no, we need this, we need that. So-and-so says this is a bad implementation or whatever. they're just jotting everything down, jotting everything down. And then, when we're done kind of just like having our therapy session, unloading, they'll stand back and they kind of look at it and they start to go through, this we could fix with software. It'll probably take 3 months. This we could fix with software. This will take a week. This, not going to happen. It's going to have to take a hardware change. This will be next iteration. And they know right off the bat like how much processing bandwidth is already in the camera and what they can implement within that bandwidth, right? Because anything you add is going to take up more processing bandwidth, and anything you take away could probably free something up. So there has to be a give and take.
On the lossless raw,
Yes.
what are the disadvantages to go to the small lossless, medium, or high? I mean,
Yeah, file size.
yeah, no, that makes it smaller. Why
Yeah.
not always just go to the smallest? What are the
Oh,
drawbacks
yeah,
by
so-
changing to the other ones from regular raw?
You sometimes will lose, like sharpness sometimes can be lost. Fidelity sometimes can be lost. Again, it's not an exact, like you'll always lose XYZ because each scene is a little bit different. And I'm not sure exactly, how the algorithm kind of punches
When it's
everything
making it
down.
smaller, it's not taking
Yeah.
longer to write it because it has to do more processing. Or when you try to open
Yes,
the files,
that's
does
true.
it have to take more processing?
It does take longer to write the lossless compress. It takes the least amount of time for us to write the compressed file, which is strange. But yes, the regular compression is a simpler, I think, compression than the lossless compression. And so that does have an effect on how quickly you can shoot at the maximum frame rate, right? Maximum drive rate. So if you want to get 10 FPS, you want to get 50 or 30 or whatever it is, that's maximum for that camera. It's usually with the compressed RAW and JPEG. Yeah.
Last one. As a Sony person, are you required to use a Sony strap?
Am I required to use a Sony strap?
No, he's got Peak Design tabs on a couple of these.
But guess what? It is a Sony Peak Design strap. But no, I have, what's funny is like, there's a lot of people that use Sony cameras and they don't use the Sony straps. Yeah. And not just like, switch to Peak Design. There's people who have like old Nikon straps or old Canon straps, and they're like, this is just the perfect strap. And we've told the engineers, we're like, look, see, I'm not just telling you. You can see it. I've been to Super Bowl and like folks come in and yeah, they have 3 A1s and all the lenses and stuff, and it's like a tiny little like Canon strap. I think is it a Canon strap? I think it was a Canon strap. And I'm like, let me see that. And it's black on the edges and gray in the middle. It's like maybe like ½ an inch wide, and it just has like a squiggle of like rubber on the back of one side, and the other side it's like a piece of leather, a little strip of leather. He's like, when I don't want it to slide, I just have the rubber side down. When I want it to slide easy, I just flip it over, and then I can just like whip it up to my face, and it's like, that's a pretty good design, And so we try to show them, that stuff. But yeah, we use all sorts of accessories and stuff. I brought a bunch of stuff here to kind of show you the stuff that I travel with, somewhat often. I usually leave my intervalometer at home now. This is kind of not needed as much because the cameras kind of do a lot of that. But my hard drive, my cell phone battery backup, which can also power my camera. So I can add it as an accessory there. I've got my card wallet, noise canceling headphones. With mirrorless cameras, you have to have a little dust blower. And then of course a couple tripods and umbrella. Not just for rain, just to keep the sun off our heads, right?
Some of us
Not
need
Sony
more
branded.
than others.
Exactly. But yeah, so thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate all the questions. Good stuff. If you guys need me, I'm right there.